And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 126. Today we're going to be talking about the notion of containment within photos. Just this idea that sometimes you look at a photo and your eye just kind of slides out of the picture, and other times you can look at an image and you just find yourself getting deeper and deeper within it. So what's the trick to that? That's pretty much what we're going to be talking about. So we're also here live on YouTube. Let me know you're here, let me know where you're from, leave me a comment and we'll make a start. So yes, like I say, here we are live on YouTube, unless you happen to be watching the recordings. If you're not watching the recordings, or you are watching the recordings, then make sure you've subscribed as well. Somewhere down here in the YouTube bits you can click subscribe, click the little notification bell as well, so you know when new podcasts are coming up. Yes, so I can see we've got a couple of people in already. Robert says howdy all from Texas. Roy says greetings all from a wet Yorkshire. April says hello everyone from a cloudy Long Island, New York. Meg says good afternoon everyone, and Maggie says hello everyone, rainy today here in Scotland. And it is indeed. I look out the window and it's dreich, it's wet, it's miserable. So not an awful lot we can do about that today. So what we're also going to be talking about, I'm going to talk about this notion of containment, and then we're going to be looking at critique. So I've had a couple of people send in some images looking for a bit of feedback, so we'll talk about that. And then what I'll also be doing is next week I'm setting a challenge, so stay tuned for that and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's start off then with this notion of containment. So what am I talking about when I talk about that? So it's this idea then that when we look at a photo, sometimes I think what the kind of fun thing about containment is it's one of those that I never see really talked about, or rather I've only ever think I saw talked about once, which is probably where I got the idea from. But we use all these different tricks in photography to make our photo interesting. And over the last 2.5 years of doing these podcasts, I've talked about an awful lot of them, and some of them I've repeated, and they've cropped up in a lot of the different critiques. There are a whole set of different things you can do. Most of us have heard of things like rule of thirds. But there are also things of leading lines, use of diagonals, where you're focusing, highlights of dark patches versus light patches, all sorts of different things. But all these things, what we're trying to do is to get people to look at our photos and stay with our photos for more than a fraction of a second. Because in this day and age, with when most of the way we consume photos is on devices, whether it's our phones or tablets, and we tend to view them on social media platforms like Facebook or Instagram, or on photography web voting sites like Guru Shots or PhotoCrowd. And very often when we're looking at these sort of photos en masse, we tend to get into a habit of scrolling through them, and our scrolls get faster and faster and faster, and we spend less and less and less time on any particular image. An image has really got to grab our attention if we're going to be looking at it for anything more than about half a second. If you can get somebody to look at your photo for as long as 2 seconds, my goodness, you're probably way ahead of 99% of images that are out there. So how do we get our images to sort of maintain the view? And there's part of a thing whereby some of the structures, some of the way we compose the photo help to keep the viewer online looking, and some of the things we can do just drive our viewer away. And this is over and above whether they like the content or not. It's about, as we talked before, about the notion of composition. Composition isn't so much about the content, it's about how you arrange that content to make it more interesting. So, I can see Nadia's also joined us. It says, hi everyone. Glad you could make it along, Nadia. Oh, I will just say at this point, Happy Diwali, or Diwali, or there's a couple of different pronunciations. I dare say VG in India will be busy celebrating that today, so can't help correct my pronunciation. But Diwali, I think probably most people know it as in the West. So anyway, happy one of those if it's one of those you celebrate. Oh, Rosemary has arrived and said good morning, everyone. Of course, yes, it's morning over in the Pacific west of America. Here in Europe, it's afternoon, and over in Asia, it's evening. So actually, Fiji will have been Diwali all day. Okay, so where were we? Yes, this notion of containment. So what do I? Let's show you a few examples of what I mean by this. So if what I do is let's stick up this photo. And so some of you may remember this photo of a group of artists at the nail factory and in a gallery space. And we were trying to make this photo look like a kind of 17th century Dutch style painting, using all the tropes of the lighting and the shadows and the composition. And of course, the composition is something that a lot of the old masters knew all these tricks hundreds of years before the camera came along. And all the same compositional tricks are valid for pretty much any two-dimensional visual medium. So if it works in painting, it will probably work in photography too. So the fact is, what do I mean by containment here? So what we've got is we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people, including the wee child here, sitting around a table. But the thing is that they're all kind of facing inwards. So now we do have some cross looking. Here we've got these two looking at each other. Here we've got this one looking down, this one looking across. We've got this guy looking straight down here. But crucially, the people on the end are both kind of looking inwards. This person here isn't looking above the height of this person here. Wherever anybody's gaze is going, it is contained within the space of this. And what it means is our eye doesn't shoot out of the side of the picture. Because I suppose particularly when we talk about the notion of leading lines are where what happens is we follow a line. If you see somebody pointing like that, you can't help but follow the line of their finger to see what it is they're pointing at. Or even without a finger, if you see somebody looking in a direction, you kind of want to know what it is they're looking at. They could be looking in that direction, they could be looking in that direction. And so you kind of get caught up. Now, as I say, all the gaze directions on this bring you back into the picture, or certainly not above this kind of head shape. Now, what this means is the background. Now, you can go off and explore if you want, and you can find a set of scales up here and a little bottle and some interesting shadows on the wall. But these things are supportive. Even this little, so I'll come back to that one in a sec. Even this one here, where we've got the, this doesn't want me to grab it. Okay, let's try again. One last, right, is that as far as I'm going? Let's pull that this way. Yes, even this hare's head sculpture is carefully angled, so it's pointing back in the same way that a head would be if somebody was standing there. So as much as possible with the whole composition of this, we've tried to create it inwards. So that next photo, again, some of you may remember this one. And in fact, actually, I'm just realizing, of course, my head is, so what I'll do, let's just kind of shrink this down a little bit so you can get a better sense of the picture without my head being across part of it like this. And again, what you find here is the people on either side are looking into the picture. We've got this guy in the middle wearing red, which of course he's wearing red, which of course grabs our attention, pulls us in there. He's also staring out at us, so we immediately catch his eyes, and that draws us to the center of the photograph. But as we start to drift away from the center of the photograph to see what's going on, this one here is facing back in. Our eyes get drawn back into the photo. Right, now we're getting the same problem in the opposite direction. Anyway, okay, you get the sense, you get the idea. These people here, she's looking at him, she's looking at him, she's looking down here, she's looking down at the cakes or the chocolate on the things are all are still contained within a circle shape here. So this containment becomes a really important part of the structure. This one then even more obvious. So we've now got 6 people within this photo. These 2 girls down here are sharing, they're looking at a book. But that book, their arms coming down here create the base of the picture. So our eye doesn't actually travel much beyond that. We're aware they're wearing white dresses, but this kind of creates a little barrier at the bottom. These 2 here are staring at each other. These 2 here are looking down into the picture. So when we kind of follow the gaze, again, it's keeping us within, but it's not just that, it's the shape. The backs of these people are creating this shape around the image. And that keeps us contained. It keeps drawing us back to within the photo. Now, so far, all of these have had a kind of also slightly darker outside. You can do the same thing with a lighter outside. With this one, where we're going for the kind of Mad Hatter's Tea Party style of image, the image is, as well as the fact that everybody's pointing inwards, much like the previous one, what we have here is as it moves out towards the edges, it lightens out and it becomes more like a sketch, a drawing. And this was very deliberate in the style that I was trying to give it. So this almost looks like a kind of Edwardian illustration. So that illustrative sort, so the painting here, the techniques I was using in Photoshop now is reverted to virtually just a small sketch. So there's these little details you can go and look at, but the prominence, the strength of the photo is in the center, and this is what's kind of drawing you in. This one, again, at this point we've got all sorts of lines sort of shooting all over the place. I'll tell you what, let's just open 1 or 2 of these with Photoshop, and I'll just kind of do some little drawn lines on top of it. And actually, just let me okay, I'll just flick back just while that's opening. Noticing on got a couple more comments here. Jack Loy has joined us. Says hello everyone. Pat says sorry I'm late, fell asleep after lunch. We are promised thunder. Well, I'm glad you woke up in time. Hope the thunder doesn't cause any power cuts or anything. April says photo looks like a painting and bad weather everywhere. It seems cloudy, rainy, stormy. Right, so where were we? Let me flick back to here. So what I wanted to talk about here was let's just take this, let's make that white, and let's get a pencil tool. So the thing is, if you take something like this, as well as the fact that you've got these shoulder marks down here and up here, he's looking this direction, well, or maybe sort of slightly more down, he's looking at his comb. The comb is taking us in this direction. Davey here is looking down at the mug. Ali is looking straight over at Grant. Grant is looking out at us. Ali's arm comes down, starts pulling us up this way, which is bringing us back to Grant. Grant's arm comes round here, takes us to a cigar, which draws us back up to Ali. So you can see that what's happening is, and then even things like the top of this kind of throne chair is creating a sort of subtle barrier at the top. So each of these lines, whether we're sweeping round the line of Fergus here, following shoulders down, following arms round, we've got all these kind of lines which are continually drawing us back into the picture. This one here, again, now in this one, this woman here is looking more down in this direction, but what's happening is the frame of the mirror is creating this border. Now again, like I say, there are things you can go and explore. There's a cross up in the corner there. There's a few little things down on down here. Even a picture of a dog underneath, and an ashtray with lipstick coated cigarette butts and smoke coming up. And there's things you can look at and explore, but ultimately your image, your eye keeps getting brought back into this mirror. So the curve, the oval of the mirror is creating this containment. Okay, so that gives you a sort of sense of what containment is, hopefully. Let's show you a little slightly more example then of what it isn't. So here's a photo not used. This was me still setting up when I took photos of, this is Doug Fitch, a potter who lives about 15 miles up the road into the hills somewhere. And I did a set of photos of him and his wife. They're both potters, and in fact, actually, you might recognise that Doug there is the same Doug who's the potter here in this photo. Sorry, I seem to have lost double clicking too much. Right, okay, let's go back to here then. So here we have, now the point about this photo is that when I was doing a whole set of photos, I was doing test photos and trial photos, and in all of it, what you do is you then go through and you pick the best photos, and those are the ones you're editing up. This then was one of a sequence of which, or one of a set, which was never going to be set up. As you can see, Doug isn't looking at the camera, we're not engaged. I'm just busy at this point. I'm going click. Basically, what I've done is I've set up a light outside the window through an umbrella, because actually although there was this little window at the end, it was very dark. It was only 6 feet away from a wall. There wasn't any real light coming through it, but I wanted backlight in the picture, so I stuck a light behind there. I've taken this photo just to see what's happening with that light. We've also got the kind of the ambient light on. We've got the kind of overhead lights on, which aren't that great. You can see again these shadows under Doug's eyes. So all in all, the lighting isn't very good, and I'm still taking a few shots to get the lighting where I want it. So I was never going to use this photo anyway, but even less so because actually this is a photo where you don't have containment. Because what happens here is, well, again, let's just open this with Photoshop so I can point out a few lines. At this point, and the back end of, the side here, we've got this lot is kind of, so it's sort of cutting off here, which means we've got this large chunk of picture which isn't actually really doing anything. It sort of gets lost. Our eye doesn't want to go there. Our eye gets drawn into this bit because this is where it happens, and we tend to be looking at the face as well. But the other thing is about this face is Doug is looking out the picture. We follow his gaze that way, and that's just taking us out of the picture. His arm comes round here, his hand is pointing us out this way, this arm is pointing us out this way. So what's actually happening with this picture is the lines are taking us off in this direction. They're taking us out to the left of the photo. So it's a singularly unsatisfying photo. Fine as a quick bit of documentary, fine you caught somebody looking slightly surprised or in the middle of conversation or listening to something else, distracted, but it's not a grabbing photo. Now, if we compare that then to one of the photos that did end up in the set, which is this. This, by comparison, far more drama, far more engaging an image. And this isn't just because it's been edited, though it has, and we can now, I've managed to get the lighting how I wanted it. So I've got the backlight, and I've got a sort of slug with an orange gel on it coming through the window, so it sort of looks a bit like there's a sort of back sunlight coming through. So I've got the lighting I wanted, but in terms of the editing also, I've given it a slight vignette. It's darker at the top here and a little bit darker at the bottom. And what that's helping to do is it's helping to emphasize the idea that this then, the bottom of here, becomes a containment barrier. So he's glancing down in this direction, which is bringing us to here, but we're not going to go beyond here because when we get to this bit, we kind of bounce back again. His arm comes round here, round his head. So again, we've got a containment at the top. His arm comes round here, down here, we've got a containment here. So the whole picture is drawn within this space here. And each of the lines are kind of drawing us back in from following his gaze to the way his arm is sitting at a diagonal to the way that I've shaded the top and bottom, helps to create then this sense of containment. We don't want to go anywhere else. We don't have lines drawing us, throwing us out of the photo. Another photo is this one. This one's slightly less obvious, but at the same time, it doesn't have maybe to the same extent that completely contained, but it is still happening. So with this one, what's happening is this was actually a shot which again didn't intend to make it into the right one. I have actually talked once before about this photo. One of the lights didn't go off, it was too dark, but actually in the editing process I suddenly rediscovered that I quite like this photo. But what we have here is, because Doug's back is turned like that, it gives us this here. At the same time, we've also got this line of the a light on a swivel here. So we've got a containment line here. What we've also got, because little Fred here is being breastfed by Hannah, Hannah's shoulder comes down, and then we follow her cradling back up. So that in itself creates a line and a barrier here. Now, this little light bit is pointing out the way, and I suppose in an ideal world, if I'd really been on the ball, but then like I say, this was still a test photo, what I might have done is swiveled that light so that the light then pointed back in the way. And then a little bit of vignetting here, but there's a little power tool up here which is kind of creating a little bit of a barrier. So you can see then that these kind of lines, like I say, that one isn't there, but ideally would have been. But by having this line, this containment, this line here, we are still creating a sense of containment. Right, let me close that and minimize that. So, let me just double check. What have we got? A couple more comments here. Oh, Pat says, I don't know what's wrong, but I can't get any sound. April says it's fine here. Oh, Pat's saying she's got it. Good. Meg says, I really like the diagonal of the arm to the clay work. Thank you, Meg. Right, okay, so that's kind of people. So, but I know a lot of you don't do people. So how can you kind of create containment with other things? So let me talk then about this idea of, let's use a few other examples here. So if we take this photo here of this, so this is a macro photo of a daisy. I can't remember if it was rain or dewdrops, but at this point anyway, sun has come out, and there's a natural containment within this, which works in two different ways. One is the fact that we've got darker corners, right? So there's a dark patch up here, dark patch up here. So because it's bright in the middle, it becomes darker at the edges, so our eye just gets drawn to the middle. We don't have anything particularly to feel that we need to go out to the edges for. There's all these kind of little subtle signals where our eyes are going. What we have to remember is that we have evolved over millions of years to latch on to what might be important and to filter out what is considered not to be important. And so when we look at this, we get drawn to the brightest part of the picture, in this case, which so we're looking at the daisy. And the fact that it's dark around is also then meaning that we're not so bothered about it. So we filter that out and our attention is all in here. There's a second bit, which is this, which isn't just about light and dark. It's about sharpness and blurriness. It's about the focus. So it's really nice and sharp here, where we want to draw people's eye, but in the background, nice little bits of bokeh, but there's nothing really going on. It's out of focus. The out of focus bit means it's not important. What's important is what we focused on. Now, in the case of the photo, the photographer, in this case me, has made sure that what I've done is I've made sure that this is the bit we're focused on, but the brain looking at it kind of goes into a feedback which says, oh, that's the bit I'm looking at, that's the bit that's in focus, therefore that must be the important bit. It's almost like your brain kind of feels like it's focused on that bit itself, even though it is actually the photographer who's chosen what it is you're focusing on. So the sharpness is so important that the main thing that you are taking a photograph of happens to be in focus. If it isn't, the photo never seems to quite sit right. But sometimes you can also use the notion of colour. Again, this one is working in the same way as the daisy. The bright red of these leaves is so in contrast with the sort of darker bluey greens of the trees behind, even the orangey bits. And then again, you can kind of see slightly behind my head, it's sort of a darker patch around here. Then what happens is this becomes its own containment. So although the background is still in focus, this was a fairly narrow depth of field, and although everything is in colour, in a way, it's that what we're doing here is we're using the colour itself to create the focal point. If this was in black and white, it wouldn't work anything like as well. Okay. I could almost hear a voice going, really? So, but let me just kind of, if I just go to hue saturation and desaturate, then what we find now is it's not distinctive enough. Do you see that it doesn't actually really stand out very much because there's not enough contrast between the foreground and the background. It is maybe a little bit lighter, but not much. And in fact, actually, if I use a different style of black and white, if I go to gradient map, let's use classical here, again, it's not really giving us much to play with. Whereas in color, this stands out massively. So that notion of all the tricks that we use of color, of light, of shape, of whatever, in order to say this is the important bit, that bit over there is only a supporting player, this is the main feast of what we're looking at. Something like this, sometimes we can use, where we have a spiral, the spiral itself draws our eye. This big sweeping curve comes down, it curves it back in, curves it back in, curves it back in, and then we've also got this part of the stalk running down to the right here, and so that's again stopping our eye shifting further over. As we would come over here and might have ended up shooting off out the left side of the photo, the object itself curls itself round and draws our eye back into it. Sometimes though, we're taking a photo of something, and something like this tulip here, which is decaying. Now there are bits within this where the curve is coming back out, and I quite deliberately was trying to find an angle so that it would have its own kind of keeping it within it. But what also happens here is that I've used the leaves, there's kind of the darker bits of leaves and other bits of the flowers that were in the vase in order to kind of again create this sort of containment, this almost kind of vase type, this V shape, in order to hold it in place. And then I've also vignetted it a little bit so it's slightly darker in the corners than it would have been, so the eye keeps getting drawn back into the middle. So let me some of you may remember I've used this little, I like using that. Let's close a couple of windows here first. Well, it's all kind of getting a bit getting a bit cluttered here. Okay, so now I use this one sometimes as a starting point. This is my little dandelion to sort of show how to use for cropping examples, where this sits very much in the center, and again it's darker on the outside so your eye gets drawn here, but in terms of composition it's a fairly dull composition because it just sits dead center. And what we generally do with this is I've gone through things whereby I then kind of crop it down, move it to rule of thirds, turn it on the diagonal, things like that. But let's do this for a moment. Let's turn it on the diagonal, because it's not an absolute strong diagonal, it's a slight curve in the diagonal. Now if I take this curve in the diagonal, let's say I put it over here, and I'm going to use content aware just to fill in the background, just to give you a sense of what the composition is doing. And when we've got this, what happens is this slight curve of the stalk, plus the fact that this is pointing that way, curves us like that. So our attention is here, but essentially our eye is drawn here. And what that means is this lot over here all becomes pretty much irrelevant. We don't really notice it, so it feels like a less satisfying photo. Whereas if we go back a step and turn this, and we have it to the left of the photo, then what happens is as our eye gets drawn across the page, this bit creates a natural barrier, so we kind of bounce back into it. And it feels as like a sort of slightly more kind of fulfilling photo. Now, What we also have then is we have a bright patch up here, which I think in the editing I would then darken down a bit, because this is starting to grab the attention a bit, and that's taking us away from the main part of the picture. But there is this other bit which we've talked before about, which is the notion of reading left to right as well. And that is certainly here in the West, anybody sort of been brought up reading European Latin-based languages tends to read from the left to the right, and that translates into the way that we read a photo. So that if I go into this image rotate, flip horizontal, then what happens here is we have this image and we've got this space to the right here, but in a way this throws us off in this direction, and actually we end up exiting the photo. And especially because there's a sort of a brighter, slightly brighter patch here to look at, it's throwing us here, but then there isn't anything to really look at this patch here. So we just kind of carry on wandering off out of the photo. There isn't really anything to contain us. And this is because of this problem of the flip left to right. Whereas this way, because our eye comes in from the left, we hit it, we bounce back, we then kind of circle round a bit, and this here acts as a barrier to stop our eye falling off the right of the picture. So I hope this is all making sense. I will do one more, which I remember I've talked before about. Let's just straightforwardly open this in Photoshop, which is, some of you may remember when I did this picture back when we were talking about still life, and again the notion of what the Dutch masters were doing with still life. And so the thing is with still life is it's your opportunity to really play around with composition. The thing isn't going anywhere. You don't have to worry about the fact, well, I was trying to photograph that duck and it just happened to sort of end up in that part of the picture. It was a moving target, or this person didn't want to look in the right place, or they were pulling a funny face. You don't have to worry about anything else. With still life, you get to arrange everything. And that means it's a brilliant thing to do to practice your compositional techniques. And I remember when I did this one talking about this, but it's well worth reminding you, is this notion of deliberately setting up this notion of containment. So if we go back to this idea of where are the barriers, where are the leading lines, and if we kind of zoom in, well, if we look in here, so we've got a pear here, and that pear is pointing us this way, right? We've got a bit of lemon peel, which is pulling us this way. This pear's coming up here. Now, it does have a little flick up, which ultimately I was slightly less happy with. It would have been nicer if that was just turned down slightly. The grapes tumble downwards. These grapes lift up onto the plate. The peel of this comes around here. We've got a curve of a plate. We've got a knife, which is pointing us back in. We've got a jug, which is pointing us back in. We have the candle going up with a bit of smoke. That's all right. But then we've got this other coffee pot, which is drawing us back in. Okay? And then we've got fruit, which is contained within here. So when you look at this, pretty much all the lines, bar one or two small ones, are keeping us back contained within the picture. Each bit is looping us back round. So, you know, some of it quite strongly, some of it, this is kind of keeping us within the photo. This doesn't just loop round, it actually draws our attention back in. This little jug points us in here, this bit points us up here, this bit's pointing us up here. So each aspect of the photo is looking to point you back into the middle of the photo. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. This notion then of containment, which I feel is incredibly important with photos, because it's happened quite a lot in critique over the years, where we're looking at a photo and it doesn't necessarily work, and part of it is because the eye just gets drawn out of the photo rather than back into it. So it's one to really remember and keep in your toolbox. I hope you found that one useful. Okay, what else have we got? Oh, April says, I like the red and yellow leaf border on the ground. All right, that was with the trees. Pat says, super photo of the potter. And Rosemary says, the discussion, the potter's body, dandelion stem as barriers, is helpful in sorting out what makes the portions of the image to be irrelevant. Now, if I can just apply that when analysing my own photos. Yeah, well, that's great, Rosemary. I'm glad you've got the idea. And I think it's one of those things where you just kind of analyze your photos. When you're looking at your photos and going, what's wrong here? Think about where the eye is being drawn to. But then again, send them in for critique. And if that happens to be one of the issues, I can point it out. So, hope you found that useful. Cheers. Right. Okay, so, quick little reminder. Now, next week is the 30th, will be the 30th of October, which is as close as we can get without it being the actual day, Halloween. So, I'm going to do a Halloween challenge. Now, if, for example, you're busy celebrating Diwali and Halloween isn't really on your festival calendar, fine. Send me in a photo to do with Diwali, or send in a photo to do with another, any other kind of celebrational, seasonal kind of festival that you have. For most of us in the West, Halloween tends to be the big one. Day of the Dead is also kind of creeping into this area, even bonfire night for that matter. So what we're looking at, though, is I'm loosely calling it the Halloween challenge, because that's so. Think of things like that. I think I'm not going to be doing critique unless I only get 3 entries and I need to fill the time, in which case I'll maybe give a bit of a breakdown. But send in your images. Ideally, we get a few people send in. Send it if you send me one image. If you've got a second one which is very different, or then or if you really do get a bit stuck and you want a bit of feedback, let me know when you send the image in, and I'll do my best to help. But for the most part, the idea of the Halloween challenge is let's have some fun. Whether it's people with makeup, whether it's pumpkins, whether it's masks, makeup, outfits, zombies, plastic spiders even. If you can make it interesting, then send me your images. Try and get them in by Friday next week. That would be the 28th. Saturday the 29th are the absolute latest. And then next Sunday what we'll do is we'll have fun. We'll go through together and enjoy and try and become inspired by each other with what we've done. I mean, because the great thing about the photography here is whatever might be obvious to you isn't necessarily obvious to somebody else. Everybody's got a very different eye and a very different set of filters and what grabs their interest than everybody else. And what I always love about these challenges is the variety of styles of image that come in. So do please have a think about this, give it a go. Either try and create something. If you're really stuck for anything and you can't find a spider's web hanging out your window, then maybe go and raid your folders from something last year and see if you can create something, edit something up. But I look forward to seeing what you're going to put in. So I'll do a wee reminder of that at the end of the podcast as well. Now we're going to move on to the critique section. I've had 3 people send in images for critique. So the first one was Alex, and so Alex sent, this is the unedited and this is his edited version. So Alex says, "Hi Kim, on the subject of containment, I posted 4 images, 2 originals and a final cropped version. Is there anything I could have done to improve the look and feel of the final photograph?" So Alex sent in, so we've got this one of the dragonfly, which is edited out of that, and then his next one is he took this wee bird and cropped it into this one. I think really, just to start with this one, Alex, that pretty much I think the crop you've got is probably the right one. Part of the problem, the biggest problem that you have here is that the bird is quite a long way away, and so because you've then had to crop out probably something in the region of about 70% of the photo, by the time we get in to sort of this level of what have you, you're going to have lost, you're going to lose detail, you're going to lose pixels. So there's a limit to how big you could print that up. The other thing I would say is that there's just this little bit of leaf up here. This little bit of leaf here has just been cropped on the edge. And actually, given the fact that it does only go out a little bit further, if we kind of look here, I'd be very tempted to crop the edge of it just outside the edge of the leaf, rather than, you've just taken off the corner of it, and I think actually just have a couple of millimeters of blue sky in there. And I think that then would end up as essentially it would become a little bit like a barrier thing to stop the eye running off further. As it is, because it goes there, you do have the potential problem that this twig comes up here, takes our attention, and then draws us off out into the top corner of the photo, and our eye shoots away. I mean, the twigs do kind of contain the wee bird, which is good, but I think just that little bit here, where, like I say, if you look here, because it kind of curves a little bit round, and the top of your image is running here, it would kind of just create that little bit of barrier to loop your eye back into it, I think. Other than that, though, I think you've probably done the best kind of crop that you could get with that image. So that's the only real thing I think I can say about that one. Your other one, though, the dragonfly, I think the big problem that we've got here, well, there's two problems that you're up against. Well, first of all, I mean, on a good thing, you managed to spot it, because when I look at this photo, looking at it over on a small screen there, I can't really see it. So, and part of the thing is here is that the colours do match rather nicely camouflaged in with the background, which is great for keeping it away from predators, more difficult for us as a photographer trying to actually separate it out from the background. Now, when you move further in, you can make out more detail, but even at this, I would say it's a bit complicated. I've kind of got to zoom right in to about here before I feel that the background isn't interfering so much that I'm struggling to see what it is that I can make out. Now, at this point, again, we're back to the problem that we talked about in the last photo, which is if you've had to zoom in this far, you've now lost 80 to 90, probably 90% of the image. And ultimately, what you really need is either a macro lens or a zoom lens, something to get you in closer so that your starting point is that the dragonfly fills much more of the photo, so that it leaves you enough information, enough pixels left to be able to play with it. The knock-on effect, or a secondary effect of this, is because you're not close enough, you've not got enough distinction between the foreground and background. Like I say, it is already quite camouflaged. Let's just then open this with no, didn't mean to open it with Photos, I meant to open it with Photoshop. And I think, the problem is we're kind of getting down to here, and like I say, the background is still, in fact, actually, I tell you what, let's open your other one where we're already in closer. That gives us a little bit more. And at this point, again, it's a very, very busy background. What we're trying to do is how do we make this stand out against the background? Now, one of the things I would be tempted to do, first of all, is maybe even tilt it, have this on a sort of slight diagonal so that our energy is kind of coming up into this. And so what you might do is, if you are getting in closer, you have it something like this. So then we've got this kind of nice diagonal running up to the corner. I'll just use content aware there to pull that in. But we still have this problem that it's difficult to see really what's going on. So in a way, what I'd be tempted to do is, if we take the curves, what you maybe want to do is try and get it to stand out against the background more. So if we were darkening down everything, and then I'm just going to use a brush tool, set that to something like 40%-ish or something like that, and then start gently lightening just this area here, so that what we're doing is trying to get this to stand out against the background. Helps a little bit. It's a bit tricky. Maybe we'll kind of darken that down a little bit more. Another option is if we take this and maybe you try and add it as well. And again, if you were using a macro lens or in a shallower depth of field, then we would blur out the background to make it stand. I mean, one of those photos you often see with dragonflies is you see them on a single stem and the background is blurred out. And the photographer has deliberately looked for the dragonfly that landed on a single stem without much behind it, so that it could focus in and allow for an out of focus background in order to make it stand out against the background. So if at this point I was to go to blur, Gaussian or Gaussian blur, depending on, and we just sort of again blur it, but once again, if I mask that and then just sort of Now, you would really have to go in and play with it, you know, to quite a degree to get it. But at this point then, by having a slightly more blurred background, it does help it to stand out against that background a little bit more. And then a darker background and a blurred background together are starting. So if I just group those, you'll see we've gone from that to that. And if you're a little bit further away, that makes quite a bit of difference. Now this is very rough. It's maybe you want a bit more fall away. The real problem is how you've taken it in the first place. In an ideal world, like I say, you need to be much closer to it to begin with. You need a shallower depth of field so that the background isn't being interfered, so that your eye gets drawn to the sharp part, just like the daisy I was talking about earlier. Your eye gets drawn to the sharp part, not and when there's too much which is sharp, your eyes getting drawn all over the place. And the problem, of course, is that the colours of the dragonfly tend to be way too close to the background, which is, so everything is about how to make it stand out rather than get lost. So these are all the bits we're trying, and you try and work that one out at the point you're taking it, and then in post-production afterwards, what can you do to emphasise that? And things like blurring the background a bit more, darkening the background a bit more compared to your original piece. These are the things which will kind of help you with it. Hope that makes sense, Alex, but thank you for sending those images in. Oh, Pat says beautiful photo of the daisy. April says I like the tilting technique, got to remember that. Cool. Okay, next up we've got Jack. Jack sent us this one and says this is a tree line in fall. Keeps your eye on them, I think. Okay, so what Jack's done here, he's got this line of trees, fall, autumn, losing most of the leaves, and we've got these lovely shapes against the sky and the background here. Looks like the wind's just kind of blowing everything slightly to the left. I think so. That's what's grabbing our attention. There's one or two minor things with this, Jack. First of all, that horizon just doesn't look quite there. Again, barely noticeable for some. I think for me, there is just a little bit. If I just sort of grab that, if I look here, the line. If I just want to tilt it. Just what have we got? That's what we're. 0.8 of a degree, something like that. That just feels slightly happier to me. Now, what I find with this one, Jack, is part of the thing is this gap in the middle, because we've got these trees on the left, and then we've got a gap, and then we've got these trees on the right. The gap is what ends up kind of grabbing our attention. If we're talking about that notion of containment, in a way, what's actually happened is this has become a barrier, and this has become a barrier. So what we're looking for is something in the middle, except for the fact there isn't anything in the middle to look at. And so that gap becomes exaggerated, becomes the focal point, but without delivering anything. In a way, you kind of want to remove that gap. I think what you could do, if we sort of essentially copy that, not that one, copy that and paste it. Let's try that again. There we go. And move that, actually drag that over so it lines up a bit, and then crop that bit in, and then, well, obviously we just mask it a little bit just to kind of get rid of that line that's sort of sitting there, something like that, so that it all kind of works. Then what we've got then is, I think that works slightly, even then that gap is just looking slightly big. I might just want to nudge that over just a fraction more, something maybe like that. Yeah, I think. Now, like I said, because of the masking problem here, we're going to still see a slight bit of attention getting drawn to it, but for the most part, just brought in the other bit of tree there with the mask. Okay, but I think that tends to work a little bit better. So then really what we're talking about is the whole thing being about shape. Now, interestingly, with something like this, because it's about shape rather than necessarily colour, I mean, although it is the autumn, the fall colours, they're not really standing out that much. A lot of them have gone. The light, we're not really getting the really rich colours, and as such I tend to feel the shape is kind of more interesting than the colour scheme. Maybe just crop that in to bring that in which case at this point I'm very, very tempted to say go black and white. If we went to oh, not that, let's do black and white. Oh, that's still and reverse. There we go, something like that. I think, you know, we end up with this kind of sort of silhouetted look, which I think is really interesting. Actually, you know, I think I prefer the perceptual version here, where it's really contrasty, black and white. So actually, I think there's, yeah, when I look at that, I think there's definitely that little bit more drama in that notion of, I think that notion of black and white versus colour is often, what's the colour adding to it? And we've got a blue sky and we know it's a sunny day, but the colours themselves aren't really contrasting, grabbing us. So why not play with that notion of black and white? Something there to toy around with. I mean, I think in the absence of having anything that's filling in the gap, you're then trying to look for saying, well, what else is really interesting about this photo? And what is interesting is that shape, is that fact that the leaves are kind of coming off, but it is as much about the texture, and I think it's more about the texture than it is about the colour. And once you kind of identify that, then black and white helps you to accentuate that notion of textural difference, tonal difference, as opposed to colour difference. So I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense. Okay, on to then the last one. Oh, Jack says, thank you, helps a lot. Excellent. Pleased it does, thank you. Okay, on to the last picture then that I want to talk about today is from Jim. And Jim says, hi Kim, my submission for critique. This week, I took this in Edinburgh at the Fringe Festival this summer. I thought the lady with the sunglasses looking at the walker gave a wee story. Actually, let's just open that up so you can kind of sort of see that. And this is a fun photo. And what else? I'll just come back to that. The image is not cropped and is more or less straight out the camera because it was a glorious day. There are shadows. Any critique's always welcome. So what we've got here is the fact that we've got people sitting around on a bench. This here then is a statue of somebody walking. But when we look at this lady here, it's like she's looking up and she's watching somebody walking past. But of course, he obviously can't be walking past because he's a statue. And that's a kind of, you know, so that's the little bit that Jim's observed, and it's kind of a fun thing. You know, whoa, who's walking past? Oh, they're not walking, you know. So a bit of fun with that. So what I would say with this then, if that's your kind of key story, Jim, what we're then looking at is what are the elements that are kind of distracting from this and how can we enhance that story? And the fact is that the woman here who is looking at it, once we know she's there looking at it, that's fine, we see it, but it isn't necessarily immediately obvious. She's lost in amongst she's one of 5 people sitting on a bench. We've got this doorway in the background, which is red, and as we've talked before about red being one of these colours that does tend to kind of grab the attention. We've also got this sort of bright yellow poster over here, which is also an attention grabber. And there's a lot of contrast of light and dark because it's heavy shadow as well. So there's a lot of elements of this which are kind of detracting us from that element of the story. So first of all, what I would be tempted to do with this, Jim, is actually just pull this in a little bit, and probably don't need this guy on the end to be part of that. And I would say something like this. We'll get rid of that concert today as well. And immediately by cropping in a little bit more, we're trying to remove some of the distraction factors. So whether it was that banner up there, more of the empty sky, or this person sitting here, we've now narrowed down the chances of our viewer actually spotting that this person is now looking over here at the statue. So other things we can then do with this. If I come up here, maybe we want to vignette it a bit. So again, because there's quite a bit of brightness down in the bottom corner, if we just go here and vignette, just pull the corners in a little bit, something like that. That's again what we're trying to do with the vignette, is create this kind of little slightly artificial barrier so that the bright patches to the side don't kind of overgrab our attention. Now, another thing I think we would maybe want to do is tone down the reds and the yellows in this. If I, but actually, let's just go, tell you what, let's go to hue saturation here. And what I'm going to do is, if I go to the yellow, first of all, because what we're noticing is this poster here is really, and I'm just going to kind of, if I desaturate it all the way, it's gone, but maybe just drop the saturation down so it's just sort of sitting there. We're aware that it's yellow, but it's not screaming yellow at us. And then what I might also do is if we go to the reds, because this red chunk here is really grabbing our attention, and desaturate, again, we don't necessarily want to make it grey, but we just want to tone it down considerably. Now, having done that, so I now click, so now having done that, the problem is of course there's a lot of red in everything else. So what I might do is just put it back in, and again mask, using the mask, take that back to white, and then just paint in the areas that I want to. So I tone down that back bit there, tone down that a little bit there. So what we've done then is we've taken away another part of the distraction. Now, didn't mean to do that. Select all, multiple copy, right. So now I've got that as my kind of full piece. What else can I do with it? What I might want to do is actually draw a little bit more detail out of the shadows so that we can see her a little bit more. So if I go to basic here and I bring the shadows up, so I can create, we're now getting a little bit more sense of her, maybe a little bit of clarity, something like that. Maybe I might even just add a touch more vignette. Want to be careful about overdoing it. But now we've got a better sense of her. We've also got a lot of bright patches over here where, so again, a little bit like we did with Alex, what you can do, and you've got to be careful with, you've got to keep it subtle, but you play around with it, is maybe I'm going to take the curves and I'm going to kind of darken everything down a bit, but I'm going to lighten her back up. Maybe I'll tell you what, let's do that at 50% or something like that, and just kind of feather it in a little bit. And what we're trying to do here is make it so that she's standing out, but there isn't like a hard line around her. And then what we also need to do is bring our statue back in, because he is part of the key part as well. So what we've done here is, by doing this, we're drawing attention using the notion of light and the brighter patches. We're drawing more attention to her and to the statue. We have cut out person over here, we've darkened down the others, we've desaturated bits that were grabbing our attention. And so now if I just group all those together, and then we can see the difference between the original and this. And in fact, actually, if I pull out a bit further than that, we'll go back to history, and we start off with, this is the original, and then this is the edited one. And so you can see now then that your story, which is woman looking up at statue walking past, now we get a much stronger sense of it. There's a bunch of people here, we can now see her head sticking up a bit more, we've got him, we've toned down as many of the distracting elements as we can in order to emphasize the main bit of story that we wanted. So I hope that helps, Jim. I hope that gives you the kind of feedback that you were needing with that. Okay, Rosemary says, such a fun image, Jim. The live folks are so still with statue seeming alive. And April says, yes, light is a tricky element in photography. Okay, cool. So that brings us pretty much to the end of that. Thank you ever so much to Alex, to Jack, and to Jim for sending in their images. I hope you found the stuff on containment useful. A wee reminder that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining in any way, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is definitely one of the ways you can do that. So next week then, like I say, a Halloween challenge. Send me in your photos of, and your interpretation could be as broad as you like with that. I look forward to you know what Halloween is, or Day of the Dead, or like I say, if it's not celebrated in any way in your part of the world, send me some other kind of celebratory photo or festival photo or something else. Perfectly acceptable for this one. So that's the Halloween challenge for next week, for the 30th of October. But like I say, do try and get your images in earlier in the week, in terms of the Friday or the Saturday at the very latest. And again, if it's going to be the Saturday, earlier in the Saturday, because my time trying to organise everything for it. So I hope that all makes sense. I hope you've all had a lot of fun. Thank you everyone for turning up, and I'll see you all next week. Take care. Have a good one.